Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Judy Woodruff is away. On the NewsHour tonight, the pandemic persists. Amid holiday travel, hospitals battle a surge in Omicron cases around the country. And massacre in Myanmar. A Christmas Eve attack leaves dozens dead, with aid groups claiming government forces are to blame. Then, the year in TV and movies. What to watch this holiday season with a look back at the best entertainment offers of 2021.
First series that comes to mind is Hacks. It's kind of a generational look at how women have been treated in the comedy world and the entertainment world.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
It's the little things. The reminders of what's important. It's why Fidelity dedicated advisors are here to help you create a wealth plan. A plan with tax-sensitive investing strategies. Planning focused on tomorrow while you focus on today. That's the planning effect from Fidelity.
Consumer Cellular, Johnson & Johnson, BNSF Railway, financial services firm Raymond James, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, working to build a more healthy, just, and inclusive future for everyone at czi.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
President Biden is promising the federal government will do more to help states facing the new Omicron wave of COVID-19 infections. He spoke today as fresh data showed average daily infections are up 80% in 2 weeks. At the same time, the CDC issued new guidance for the infected, cutting quarantine time in half to 5 days. We'll have much more on the pandemic after the news summary. South Africa has begun a week of public mourning for the late Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The Nobel Peace Prize winner died Sunday at 90 after a lifetime of fighting apartheid and working for racial unity. Today, bells rang at midday from St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town, and President Cyril Ramaphosa hailed Tutu's legacy.
This is a sad moment, but it is also a moment of celebration. Celebrating a life well led and a life that is so gigantic. He was brave, he was forthright, and we loved him just for that, because he was a voice of the voiceless.
We'll take a longer look at the life of Desmond Tutu later in the program. In northern Brazil, thousands of people are bracing for a new round of flooding after 2 dams burst on Sunday. 2 northeastern cities were ordered to evacuate in a region already hit by weeks of torrential rain. Even before the dams gave way, flooding had displaced nearly 20,000 people since early November. At least 20 people have been killed. Back in this country, parts of Northern California and Nevada are buried under heavy snow after a major winter storm over the Christmas weekend. A 70-mile stretch of Interstate 80 connecting Reno to Sacramento was closed in both directions due to poor visibility. The storm brought record cold and snowfall. Parts of Southern California were hit hard by rain and heavy winds. President Biden signed today a defense bill that authorizes $770 billion in Pentagon spending. That is a 5% increase from last year. It includes a pay raise of 2.7% for troops and aid for Ukraine. It also directs that independent military prosecutors take over any sexual abuse cases from military commanders. In economic news, this year's holiday spending showed the biggest increase in 17 years despite Omicron's disruptions. The tracking service MasterCard Spending Pulse reports sales through Christmas Eve were up 8.5% from last year. And on Wall Street, that strong holiday showing helped boost major indexes by 1% or more. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 351 points to close at 36,302. The Nasdaq rose nearly 218 points. The S&P 500 added 65 for a new record close. And two more passings of note. The world-renowned Harvard biologist Edward O. Wilson has died. He was known as Darwin's natural heir, arguing that a link existed between human behavior and genetics. From there, he went on to pioneering studies of ants and to focus on preserving species and ecosystems. Wilson spoke with the NewsHour in 2016.
The stakes are the future of life, the future of the living part of the environment. If we allow the living part of the environment to disappear, for me, it will be by future generations regarded as one of the most catastrophic, even evil, periods in human history.
Edward O. Wilson was 92 years old. And Texas lawyer Sarah Weddington died on Sunday in Austin, half a century after she argued the landmark abortion rights case Roe v. Wade. She was just 26 years old when she first went before the U.S. Supreme Court. The justice's ultimate decision in 1973 legalized abortion nationwide. Sarah Weddington was 76 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, reflecting on the life and legacy of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Amy Walter and Asma Khalid break down the major political issues of this past year, how students can feel safer from the threat of school shootings, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The Omicron COVID variant continues to spread at lightning speed, upending plans to put the pandemic behind us. Infections are soaring, hospitals are hunkering down, and the White House is working to respond. Stephanie Tsai has our report.
Hundreds of thousands of Americans are now testing positive for COVID each day, and that is those who can get a test. Many spent Christmas weekend waiting in line for hours.
Out of precaution, abundance of precaution really, and just to keep everybody around us safe, I feel that it's best to get tested periodically here.
The Biden administration has pledged to provide 500 million at-home rapid tests for free, but they won't become available until next month. President Biden and members of his COVID-19 task force met virtually with governors today. He defended his actions to date while promising more federal support for the states.
I know the lines have gotten very long in some states. That's why I ordered FEMA to set up pop-up sites in places with high demand to shorten the wait. We went from no over-the-counter tests in January to 46 million in October, 100 million in November, and almost 200 million in December. But it's not enough.
Amidst the surge in cases and staffing shortages in many sectors of the economy, the CDC announced it would cut the time it recommends people isolate if they have COVID in half, from 10 days to 5 days, assuming they no longer have symptoms. All of this as new infections have surged 80% in the past 2 weeks to well over 200,000 a day due to the highly contagious Omicron variant. And the number of children infected has jumped 28% in 2 weeks. In New York City, where 50,000 people tested positive on Christmas Eve, COVID hospitalizations among children increased 5-fold in recent weeks. Half of those are under the age of 5. New York Governor Kathy Hochul pressed today for widening vaccinations.
We are encouraging the FDA to give approval for children under the age of 5 to be vaccinated, obviously at a lower dose, but we want to protect this younger population.
Meanwhile, New York City's vaccine mandate for private employers went into effect today, affecting nearly all businesses. Around the world, another 2,300 flights were canceled today, including at least 800 in the U.S., in large part due to employees calling out sick. The nation's leading infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, suggested today a possible vaccine mandate for domestic air travel.
When you make vaccination a requirement, that's another incentive to get more people vaccinated. If you want to do that with domestic flights, I think that's something that seriously should be considered.
Many countries already require vaccination documents for international travelers. Israel, which has some of the strictest COVID policies, is also on the cutting edge of vaccinations. Today, it began testing the effects of a fourth shot of the Pfizer vaccine in healthcare workers, a move public health experts are weighing elsewhere.
For a deeper look at the rapidly spreading Omicron variant and its impact, I'm joined by Dr. Megan Ranney. She's an emergency physician and academic dean at Brown University School of Public Health. Dr. Ranney, I know you are working in the ER all day, so I especially thank you for joining us with your time. So caseloads, as you know personally at hospitals, are surpassing what we saw last winter. But so far, death and hospitalization rates aren't tracking as closely with the case rates as we've seen during previous surges. Dr. Ranney, does that jive with what you're seeing on the ground?
It does. Listen, even today, the only people that I admitted to the hospital for COVID were people who were unvaccinated. And thanks to our tremendous vaccination campaign across the United States over the last year, about 60% of us have received both shots, and a significant percentage have gotten those boosters. That is protecting us even in the midst of this surge. On top of that, there is some preliminary evidence that Omicron itself may be slightly more mild. But let's not kid ourselves. Even a mild COVID infection, particularly for the unvaccinated, is still really unpleasant. You are still looking at days out of work, although fewer days than prior to today's CDC announcement. You are looking at feeling completely under the weather. You may be looking at long COVID symptoms. Again, vaccines protect against all of those things, but for the unvaccinated, COVID remains potentially deadly.
And given that Dr. Fauci has called it extraordinarily contagious, you also have to look that at just a small percentage of a really big number can be a lot of people. Is your hospital overwhelmed? Is it overrun with COVID patients? Because you have previously described Rhode Island as having entered a, quote, disaster level of care.
Rhode Island is in an extraordinarily bad situation. This is not purely because of COVID. This is a problem that has been brewing for months and months. We have folks that put off normal preventive care over the last year and a half because of fears of COVID or because of doctor's office being closed. We have people who have put off needed surgeries because of delays in anything that was non-emergent. And we have a huge staff vacancies because of burnout and moral injury, as well as, of course, because some people can go and make more money working in other states. Our hospital shut down any elective surgeries a couple of weeks ago, and today shut down any non-emergent surgeries. We are out of ICU beds. Our waiting times in the ER are truly through the roof. I can't even begin to describe what it's like right now working as an ER doc. Again, not just because of COVID, but because of everything and how broken the healthcare system really is.
And that is in a state, Rhode Island, that has more than a 75% vaccination rate, which I understand is among the highest in the country. You said that most of the folks that you saw in the ER are unvaccinated. In fact, I think you said all. But we do know that Omicron is affecting those that have been vaccinated and boosted. Is that happening among the staff? Is that contributing to the staff shortage? Are you seeing nurses and doctors also come down with this variant?
So the staff shortage predated the Omicron surge. We have about 3 times as many vacancies in my healthcare system right now as we normally would this time of year. Again, because a lot of folks left bedside care, retired early, just because COVID took so much out of them. We are seeing cases among the vaccinated, but they are by and large quite mild. I have 6 fellow physician colleagues that were out today alone because of cases caught in the last week. But for those of us that are vaccinated, this really is more like a cold. It is something short-lived, quite survivable, and you're going to be able to get back to work quickly. Our staffing shortages are due to much more than just Omicron.
So do you agree the CDC last week shortened the isolation time for those hospital staff that do test positive for COVID from 10 days to 5 days with a negative test? And today they did that for the wider public. Is that going to help? Do you agree with that?
So I think it's important that we follow the science, and there is emerging strong evidence that particularly for those of us who are vaccinated, if we are asymptomatic, after 5 days, we're no longer infectious. It is right to allow those folks to get back out into the world, not just to work, but also to play, to school, to family gatherings, to the grocery store, right? Don't keep people at home for nothing. The thing about the new CDC guidance that does give me a little bit of pause is that it applies equally to the unvaccinated and to the vaccinated. It says very specifically that you should continue to wear a mask for another 5 days after you finish that isolation period. We know already that the unvaccinated are less likely to mask. That does unfortunately put the rest of us a bit at risk.
Quick question as we head into the New Year's holiday. Any advice there as you see the ER continue to flood with patients? And is there enough testing in Rhode Island?
There isn't enough testing anywhere in this country. I have a friend, a fellow physician, who got sick over the weekend. She and her entire family, with the exception of one family member, have tested positive on rapid tests. They're literally unable to get a PCR right now. That's not acceptable at this point in the pandemic. There is so much more that needs to be done both on state and on federal levels to shore up the healthcare system, to shore up testing, and to help us get through to the other side of this surge.
Dr. Megan Ranney, an emergency physician in Rhode Island, thank you so much for joining us on the NewsHour.
Thank you.
It's been more than 10 months since Myanmar's military seized power in a coup. Since then, soldiers have fought with urban protesters and rural militias using violence activists call brutal. They accuse the military of killing more than 1,300 people and detaining more than 11,000. And today, the United Nations called for an investigation into a new massacre that the U.S. described as barbaric. Nick Schifrin reports.
In eastern Myanmar, a line of cars was trying to escape nearby violence, but soldiers torched the vehicles and burned the 35 people who were hoping to flee, possibly including 2 staff of Save the Children. Other photographs of the Christmas Eve massacre, too horrific to show. It's the second time in 4 weeks soldiers are accused of burning their enemies' bodies. The junta that re-seized power in February has ruled through horror and fear. It's helped spark an exodus. On Christmas Day, families in the southeast saved only what they could carry and fled to neighboring Thailand. Thousands have become refugees to escape military air power, even if they had to walk across rivers. Myanmar's military ruled the country for half a century before civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi came to power in 2015. Her National League of Democracy party easily won the 2020 election. But on February the 1st, when the new parliament was supposed to sit, General Min Aung Hlaing declared a state of emergency and arrested Suu Kyi and hundreds of pro-democracy activists. Earlier this month, Suu Kyi was sentenced to 2 years in prison. That day, protesters took to the streets in Myanmar's capital, continuing their resistance to military rule. All year, they have demonstrated. A massive civil disobedience movement has paralyzed basic services. In response, the military has turned urban streets into battlegrounds. But the resistance extends to the countryside, where ethnic militias attack army checkpoints. For decades, ethnic minorities have fought what they consider central authorities' political persecution. Myanmar has about 20 ethnic armed groups in yellow that control about a third of the country's territory. The Christmas Eve attack took place in Kaya State, where the Karenni ethnic army has been fighting the military on and off for years. But since the coup, urban civilians have teamed up with ethnic militias, united to resist military rule.
Everyone came here with their resentment and revolutionary spirit, so that is why they can only focus on fighting for revolution.
To understand how critical this moment is for Myanmar, I'm joined by Priscilla Clapp, previously Chief of Mission in Myanmar and is now Senior Advisor to the U.S. Institute of Peace, which was established by Congress. Priscilla Clapp, welcome back to the NewsHour. This attack was brutal, but we have seen other attacks just as brutal over the last few months from the military. Why?
The better part of a year, in fact, many months. They have run into very, very serious popular opposition in the country that they did not expect when they took over in a coup on February 1 this past year. The original demonstrations against the coup makers have turned into violent opposition. And so the military is fighting for its life now, and particularly attacking areas of the country where the resistance is the strongest. And the area that they attacked on Christmas Day is one of those.
And so you referred to those original protesters, the civil disobedience movement in the cities. We've also got ethnic militias, so-called People's Defense Forces as well, are expanding. How unprecedented is that widespread resistance? What's the implication of it?
It's quite unprecedented. It has not happened before. When there have been rebellions against military rule, they have been largely urban. They have been in the form of protests, in the street protests. They have not really turned violent. Separately, the Army has been fighting ethnic militias and armies for 70 years, unsuccessfully. They haven't won any battles against them. In fact, during that time, they have become more organized, better funded, better armed, and stronger control over their territories. So the Army is actually in a losing battle overall over time, and they're fighting for their life.
And so we've seen, as you've just said, these ethnic militias confronting the Army, fighting the Army, even grabbing a little bit of self-governance in their territories. But could this go further than self-governance? Is the very state at risk of fracture?
I believe it is. That's a debatable point, but it is going in that direction. There's no question. The area along the China border where there are some very strong armies and militias, and on the west along the Bangladesh border, the Arakan army, which has taken over the Rakhine state, which used to be called Arakan, is very strong, and they've basically beaten the military at their own game there, and they have virtual control over most of that state. The military doesn't dare to attack either of those areas because they know they would lose.
As the military struggles with those fights that you just identified, what is the morale inside the military? Many soldiers are being asked to fight where it's very cold. There's some trench warfare, and there's attempts to actually get soldiers to defect. So what's the morale inside the military?
At the lower levels, the military is suffering from very bad morale. The people that are on the front lines fighting are losing. They're losing a lot of people. They're getting killed themselves, and there are many defections. And the defectors are going off into the People's Defense Forces and fighting back against the military and helping the People's Defense Forces learn how to fight. They're arming them with their weapons and so forth. So it's becoming a real civil war.
What do you think the United States government should do? There are experts I talk to who say squeeze the military sources of revenues more, that's oil and gas, pressure the UN to support the opposition group, the National Unity Government, even declare what the military did against the Rohingya a genocide. Do you think those steps could help?
All of those steps are good steps, but there are more as well. And the U.S. government will be coming up with a new strategy soon at the request of the Congress. So we will see many more things happening. I think that I believe they are looking very hard at how to cut off some of the revenue from oil and gas and other things. It's not that simple. So we have to be careful. But there are ways of squeezing them, and that is definitely the main thrust of U.S. policy, is just to squeeze the military more and more. I believe that they should be accused of genocide, but I don't think it's just Rohingya. It's not even ethnic cleansing anymore. They're cleansing they're going after all ethnic groups, including their own.
Finally, in the brief time we have left, let me just ask about the humanitarian situation. The UN warns that half of Myanmar's population could fall into poverty. Millions could face hunger. How dire is the humanitarian crisis?
Absolutely dire. In fact, that has already come to pass. I would say that half or more of the population is already facing enormous hunger. But part of the strategy of the opposition is to destroy the economy. They're willing to take this in hand just to bring the army down. And it's very difficult to predict what the end will be, but it's going to go on for quite a long time, unfortunately, and people will suffer badly.
Priscilla Clapp, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now to the life and legacy of Desmond Tutu, Archbishop, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and a conscience for South Africa. His life spanned 90 years, most of it spent striving against segregation and then in reconciling the races.
We say we are the rainbow people. We are the new people of a new South Africa.
Cape Town, 1989, a clarion call to freedom. Before more than 20,000 protesters, Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu appealed for the birth of a new nation and an end to the iron grip of apartheid.
I want you to lift your hands. I want you to say, our march to freedom is unstoppable.
Nearly 5 years later, in 1994, Tutu helped introduce the world to South Africa's first black president, Nelson Mandela. And in the process, he witnessed the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. Desmond Tutu was born in 1931 in a small mining town before his family moved to Johannesburg. It was an era when South Africa's white minority codified long-standing racial segregation into rigidly enforced apartheid and deliberately de-emphasized education for black people. That prompted Tutu to abandon a teaching career for the clergy. He joined the Anglican Church and quickly rose through the ranks, gaining notice as he spoke out against the white government and condemned apartheid. In 1976, unrest in the black township of Soweto boiled over into riots. The government's brutal response left hundreds dead, mostly young and black, and sparked an international outcry. The years that followed saw Tutu rise to become Archbishop of Cape Town and gain international recognition as one of the anti-apartheid movement's strongest advocates, behind the pulpit and on the streets.
The day anybody can show me that the Bible supports apartheid, that day I will take my Bible and tear it into little strips, and I will stop being a Christian.
He rejected the U.S. policy of constructive engagement with South Africa's white regime and instead vigorously supported economic boycotts of his own country. Those efforts earned him the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1984. Afterward, in an interview with the NewsHour, he mused on the meaning of the award.
It is saying that the world cares about oppression and injustice, and it is saying to our people, and this is their prize, don't give up. Don't give up the struggle. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
The light grew ever brighter as apartheid crumbled. Mandela was released from prison and ultimately elected president. Together, they worked to usher in a new era for South Africa. Mandela would later call Tutu the voice of the voiceless, and he named the Archbishop to lead the country's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In his 1999 NewsHour interview, the Archbishop talked about that desire for reconciliation, even in the face of decades of brutality.
I am human because you are human. My humanity is caught up in yours. And if you are dehumanized, I am dehumanized. And anger and resentment and retribution are corrosive of this great good, the harmony that has got to exist between people. And that is why our people have been committed to the reconciliation where we used restorative rather than retributive justice.
Tutu became Archbishop Emeritus in 1996, but expanded his outreach, tackling issues outside of his home borders. He visited Rwanda after the horrific ethnic genocide in the early 90s, and he weighed in on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, at times likening Israeli actions to apartheid-era South Africa. He later criticized the post-9/11 U.S.-led war in Iraq, calling it immoral. In 2009, President Obama awarded Tutu the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor.
Happy birthday!
A year later, on his 79th birthday, he announced he would step away from public life, opting to spend his days with his family.
I really want to engage in the contemplative life because, you know, often when people are in love, they just want to sit and be together, and I want to try and be a bit more of that with God, but also to have some quality time with the mother of my children.
Still, he maintained his interest in human rights at home and abroad, despite bouts of illness that had him in and out of hospitals in his final years. For the last 12 months, two political issues have remained dominant for Americans and the White House: COVID-19 and the economy. Here to dissect the progress and challenges for President Biden on both fronts are Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Asma Khalid of NPR. Tamara Keith is away. Amy, Asma, welcome to you both. This is the last Politics Monday of 2021. It's a good time to take a step back and examine those two big issues. So, Amy, wins for sure for the White House, right? You look at the impressive vaccine rollout. More than 70% of Americans now have a shot. Millions of jobs back in the economy, unemployment at historic lows, and yet, Omicron and inflation persist. Do you think most Americans feel like they're better off today than they were a year ago?
Yeah, Amna, it is the question, right? And I go back to a quote of a former governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour, who used to say about governing, you know, the key to be successful in governing is to make the main thing the main thing. And the main thing since Joe Biden took office, of course, has been COVID. And perceptions of how well he's doing on tackling COVID, or how confident people feel that we're really turning the corner on the pandemic, we're going to determine the fate of his presidency. And early on, Amna, we saw that people were feeling much more confident about how we were doing in battling COVID. I was looking back at Gallup data, and you know, as we went from February, March, through the early spring and into the summer, more and more Americans saying, yes, I'm feeling better about the situation with COVID. By the time we hit July, almost 90% of Americans said they felt better about the situation with COVID. And then the Delta situation hit, and that confidence just collapsed. And today, or really in early December, feelings of confidence about turning the corner on COVID, or as Gallup calls it, feeling like the situation is getting better, is basically where we were in January, at 30% of Americans feeling good about this. So ultimately, it is like we had an entire year where if you just knew what the numbers were in January and in December, you would think nothing happened. But what did happen, of course, is an incredible rise in optimism, and then the reality hit. And of course, as the number of Americans said they felt worse about the situation in COVID, the confidence in the economy dropped, and confidence in the president overall dropped.
And Asma, here's the thing, we are still very much in it, right? I mean, Dr. Fauci has said it's going to get worse before it gets better. Economic projections say prices will continue to rise into the new year. What is your sense of how the White House is going to respond to this? Is it stay the course or change up how they're responding?
Well, I think to date, what we've seen, at least with the economic response, has been, I think, an increasing sense of empathy around inflation. I remember going out to Pennsylvania in probably June, July, and at that point, you could spend hours outside of a grocery store just talking to folks. And the number one concern you'd hear from people is, the rising cost of gas, the rising cost of meat. In the beginning, the White House kept telling folks this is transitory. I would argue that's a word or a phrase that just didn't mean much to people. But increasingly, we have, I think, seen a greater sense of empathy from the White House, an acknowledgement of pain. Inflation and a recognition, I would say, that it's not necessarily going to go away as quickly as people had expected. When you talk about COVID, I think that situation is a lot trickier because, as the White House says, I think accurately as well, the situation has improved. Many, many people in this country are vaccinated. And so even if they do catch a bout of COVID, they are less likely to be hospitalized or die from it. The challenge for them is that we all, myself included, have this just extreme COVID fatigue, that our situation, we're all doing this on virtually yet again on Zoom. And I think that has led to a frustration. But at this point, the White House consistently tells folks the way out of this is largely to get vaccinated, to get boosterized. The challenge for them is that there is a subset of the population that has been resistant to getting vaccinated, and that doesn't seem to be changing.
I think we all know what that COVID fatigue feels like. But here's the other thing when you look back over the last year, there have been some big legislative wins, right? They pushed through the American Rescue Plan, got the emergency COVID funds out there, somehow with narrow margins, got that bipartisan infrastructure bill through. But of course, Build Back Better, BBB, the big one that is not yet across the finish line. I just want to read for you a quote from an op-ed today that came from the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. That is, of course, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Here's what she said about the negotiations and the reluctance so far of Senator Joe Manchin to get on board. She said, "We can't be naive about the difficulty of once again negotiating with someone who has not kept his commitments. But legislation remains the best path for delivering enduring relief. Democrats must prove that their voices and their votes matter, that we can produce tangible economic assistance." Asma, what does all this tell you about the chances of Democrats getting this done in the new year?
I mean, the White House remains optimistic that they can get back to the drawing board with Joe Manchin and potentially carve out some sort of alternative Build Back Better bill. Democrats across the country, I would say, do feel like they need to have, and they would like to have, two pieces of legislation that they can point to. This is a very challenging midterm year for Democrats across the country. The map was always going to be a challenge. I think if they don't have big legislative wins to show to voters, it's even more difficult for them next November.
Amy, how do you look at all this, especially in how the White House is sort of balancing some of those legislative priorities? Build Back Better isn't done yet, but neither is voting rights, neither is police reform, right?
Right. Though, again, it comes back all the way back to COVID and COVID fatigue. And the fact of the matter is our lives aren't back to normal. And that, whether it is doing this broadcast once again remotely, we're going to be on more Zoom calls. So many flights were canceled over the holidays because of flight attendants and other staff members who are sidelined over COVID. I mean, we just are reminded over and over again that we have not turned the corner. And this is the challenge for a president in pushing policies, especially on things like Build Back Better or even the infrastructure bill that don't seem to many voters to be directly related to the challenges that they're having right at this very moment. Now, there's only so much any president could do in beating back a pandemic. But as I said, I think the challenge for this president will always be finding some success there. He had early success, or at least people were giving him credit, in part because, we were getting people vaccinated. We are getting past that early phase. Delta put that in a very different context, and now Omicron, just a reminder that this thing isn't going away for quite some time. I think the other challenge that the White House has had is they've been promoting an agenda that is really expansive with a majority that is tiny in a 50-50 Senate. This was always the reality. It was always going to be a challenge, even to get some of the basics through, but to push Build Back Better, especially something that has such a big price tag, so many pieces that have to fall into place for this to happen, and doing it again at a time where people are feeling pessimistic about the state of the economy because they're pessimistic about the state of the pandemic. That is the challenge.
Amy, before we go, I want to see if I can get you both to weigh in briefly on this intersection. Of course, I know you've been following the redistricting efforts, the redrawing of states' congressional maps, but also what we've seen from former President Trump, which is fueling money and resources and energy into primarying fellow Republicans who don't agree with him, who voted against him, who don't show sufficient fealty or loyalty. That will happen as early as spring and summer of next year. There's an intersection of those two things there. I just wanted to get you to weigh in on those.
Yeah, I think it's really important as we talk about the midterms. There is going to be the talk about seats that are going to change, who will be in the majority, but it's also the kinds of people that win those seats that's very important to understanding how Congress is going to work or not work next year. My colleague, David Wasserman, has been crunching the numbers. We've had about 27 states that have completed redistricting. What he's found is that there's been an increase in the number of dark red states and dark red seats, districts, dark red or dark blue districts, a very big decrease in the number of competitive districts, which means that primaries, once again, are going to be critical. And what we could see as the president weighs in, as we're seeing others come in, is to weigh in these, that we're going to find some very Trump-like candidates coming into the Senate, coming into the House. They will have an impact on just what Congress looks like, regardless of what the majority is.
So Amy, briefly before we let you go, if you're President Biden looking at that political landscape ahead and the Democrats, what are you thinking at this moment?
What you're thinking is you need a reset. There has been a point at which the president's narrative and the message has gotten caught up in process. A lot more talk about Joe Manchin than about the successes of the administration. I hear Democrats saying to me constantly, we need to be proactive, talking about what we've been successful at instead of talking about the things where we've fallen short.
That is Amy Walter joining us for Politics Monday. I apologize, we lost the connection with Asma Khalid of NPR, but a thank you to her for joining us as well. Amy, as always, good to see you. Well, 2021 has been the deadliest year for school shootings in the past 4 years. Shootings have also led to copycat threats, including after the November school shooting in Oxford, Michigan. 17-year-old student Micah Martin from our Student Reporting Labs network talked to psychologist and school shooting expert Peter Langman about steps that schools can take to deal with those threats.
Hi, my name is Micah Martin. I'm a senior at the FV Pankow Center in Clinton Township, Michigan. And I'm really, really excited to talk to you, Dr. Langman, because there's a high level of anxiety among students and everyone wants a little bit of insight on what's been going on lately.
Well, thank you for having me.
My first question for you is, what do you think schools can do to prevent shootings, or what signs can students look for?
Well, the most important thing that schools can do is to implement what's called a threat assessment system. And what this means is that there are people on the school staff who are trained to investigate safety concerns that are brought to their attention. And to make that work, everyone in the school community, including not only the staff, but the students and parents as well, should be educated into the warning signs so they know what to report to the threat assessment team.
After the Oxford shooting, there were a lot of schools being closed down or just being beyond scared because of some empty threats. And it became quite common. Why do you think that's happening right now?
When there's a lot of threats in the wake of an attack, most of them, as you said, are empty threats. Kids may think it's funny somehow to call in a hoax, bomb scare or school shooting threat. They may think, hey, we can get out of school for a day. They don't realize the anxiety they're causing for students, staff, and parents. They probably also don't realize that that is criminal behavior. If they understood that that's a crime, they might not do it. So I think we need to educate students about why it's wrong, how wrong it is to make those kinds of empty threats. Now, in some cases, they may not be empty threats. And there's a lot of attention to what's called either the contagion effect or copycat effect. A lot of kids seem to take previous shooters as role models, maybe follow in the footsteps of someone else who's committed an attack. So we can't assume in the wake of an attack that all subsequent threats in the next couple of weeks are empty threats. That's why it's important to take each threat seriously and investigate it to make sure we don't miss anything.
As you know, students have been feeling very anxious these past couple of weeks, which is obviously normal. But how do you think we should take care of our mental health during this time and hopefully feel safe again?
You know, unfortunately, the world can be a dangerous place, so there's no guarantee. We can't tell children nothing's going to happen. The best we can do is reassure them that school shootings, despite what we see in the media, they remain very rare events, that most schools are safe, but they can also feel safe by knowing what the system is in terms of how to report someone. Probably the most important one is some sort of anonymous tip line, whether that's a phone number, a number students can text, a button on the school's website, some way to make it as easy as possible for students to come forward anonymously and share what they know. That's the best way to get the information the threat assessment team needs to at least start an investigation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lingman, for speaking with me today and giving me and some of my fellow teens out there some insight on what's been going on and showing things from another perspective. I really, really appreciate having you with us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
As the year comes to a close, we know a lot of you have been asking the same pandemic question of what should we watch now? Jeffrey Brown spoke with a film critic and a TV critic who shared their recommendations for the holidays and beyond. It's part of our arts and culture series, Canvas.
This year brought a deluge of new viewing choices. I'm joined here in the studio by Ann Hornaday, film critic for The Washington Post and author of Talking Pictures, How to Watch the Movies. And from Los Angeles, Lorraine Ali, television critic for the Los Angeles Times. Nice to see you both again. Lorraine, why don't you start us off with a couple of your favorites from the world of television?
Okay, well, one of my favorites is Only Murders in the Building from Hulu. And it is a comedy, but also a murder mystery starring Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez, which is an odd trio, but together they play kind of these amateur sleuths that all live in the same apartment building in New York.
Oh, that is a very good line. Badly delivered, but a good line.
They become podcasters of a crime podcast, but they also become part of the crime. And it's just hysterical. It's a great combination. I also really love Impeachment, American Crime Story, which is a dramatization of basically the Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton, what do you want to call it, fiasco scandal. Mm-hmm. And it's fantastic. And it kind of takes the salacious aspects of that era, but it adds this really kind of this depth in there and gives you the background on all these characters. It's just fantastic.
All right, Ann, you want to give us a couple of movies?
Sure. I mean, I'll start with one that we saw earlier this year that was one of the most ecstatic theatrical experiences I had, which are still rare, but it's the documentary Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. It is the directorial debut of Questlove.
I know that one well, because I got to talk to him.
Oh, lucky. So you know what an ecstatic experience this was. And it's a great film because it's not only preserving a wonderful moment, which is the Harlem Cultural Festival in 1969 that involves so many absolutely fantastic performances, but then Questlove layers in commentary, present-day commentary, and reminiscences of people who were there.
That concert took my life from black and white into color.
To create a really wonderfully layered work of art.
How about another one?
Parallel Mothers by the great Pedro Almodovar. He is so good, and he is so consistently good that I think we're almost in danger of taking him for granted. This is another fantastic Circean melodrama starring Penelope Cruz, Almodovar's muse, as one of two mothers who give birth on the same day, and then drama ensues. And he manages to get these lurid, gorgeous production values that we have come to expect from him and weave them together with much deeper themes about memory, personal history, political history that feel very much of a piece with our moment right now when people have had time to kind of reflect on their own pasts.
So when I asked you both beforehand to think about themes for the year, Lorraine, you said one theme that jumped out at you was series that you saw with strong women. What are you thinking of?
Incredibly fierce women.
Fierce women.
Is more like it. Fierce women, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The first series that comes to mind is Hacks from HBO Max. And it is a half-hour comedy again. It's starring Jean Smart as an aging comedian in Vegas who's kind of doing the Vegas circuit. Popular, but she's not as funny as she used to be. She's paired up with a Gen Z comedy writer who's been canceled because she's so raw and so rough in her comedy. And the two of them together try and revive her career, basically. But it's kind of a generational look at how women have been treated in the comedy world and the entertainment world. It's really fantastic, and it's got a kind of a depth in it and some messages about feminism then and now. I think my second pick would be Yellow Jackets. And this has come later in the year. This is right here at the end of the year, and that's on Showtime. And I like to call it the Lord of the Flies with teenage girls. They are a 90s era soccer team that crashes in the wilderness, and they have to survive. And it is basically how these girls' personalities come out and what they have to do to survive.
We agreed, say no more than we have to.
And it's just a thriller, it's a mystery, but it's also kind of this generational look at how incredibly strong these women were and the price they've paid for being that strong. And I just love it.
One thing that jumped out at you, Anne, was movie musicals this year.
They're back. Who
They're
knew?
back.
Musicals. If you had asked me 2 years ago what would be hot in 2021, I probably would not have said musicals, but two of my favorite movies of the year wound up being musicals, and that's West Side Story, Steven Spielberg's new adaptation of the classic 57 Broadway play / 61 movie. It is absolutely magnificent, just bursting with color and movement and present-day resonance that feels utterly organic and not forced. Terrific performances across the board. And then another one that's coming our way is Cyrano, which is Joe Wright's adaptation of the classic novel.
Pleasure to meet you, Cyrano de Bergerac.
This features Peter Dinklage in the title role, and he just has so much soul, and the production is just full of so much passion and vision and poignance that you have this one kind of classic American musical and then one that's kind of taking it in a different direction, which I thought boded quite well for the form.
I can't resist asking you both. I always love to just ask if there's some hidden gem that you loved this past year that didn't get enough attention. Lorraine, Ali, let me start with you. What would that be?
My favorite hidden gem is We Are Lady Parts, which was on Peacock, which is really kind of a hidden gem of a streamer as well.
Here's a little something we thought you might like.
It is a limited series out of Britain, and it is about an all-female Muslim punk rock band. It basically plays with tropes about rock and roll and punk rock, and it also busts up stereotypes about Muslims at the same time. And they have an album out as well, and the lyrics this album are just, they are hysterical and they are funny, and they kind of bust open these taboos about women, Muslim women, about women who cover, and the imagery is fantastic.
Anne Hornaday, hidden gem?
Well, one I'd love to lift up is a movie called Coda, which was the big hit out of Sundance. It is directed by Sean Hayter, and it's about a young woman, senior in high school, who is facing her future and wants to kind of bust out of her small town and her family. In this case, she's the only hearing member of a deaf family. It's kind of a throwback to that wholesome coming-of-age movie that a lot of us probably grew up with and worried that Hollywood doesn't make so much anymore. And to me, this just proves that, again, that genre is strong and can be strong if it gets the support it deserves.
All right, some of the best TV and films from 2021. Lorraine, Ali, Anne Hornaday, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And online, continuing with our movie theme, as families gather in new ways over the holidays, new stories are also being told through holiday movies that increasingly star actors of color. We take a look at a few holiday films starring Asian Americans that bring community traditions to the big screen and offer new audiences the chance to learn about them. Read more on our website, that is pbs.org/newshour. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz. Join us again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you for joining. Please stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Pediatric Surgeon, Volunteer, Topiary Artist, a Raymond James Financial Advisor, tailors advice to help you live your life. Life well planned.
Consumer Cellular, Johnson & Johnson, BNSF Railway, the Kendeda Fund, committed to advancing restorative justice and meaningful work through investments in transformative leaders and ideas. More at kendedafund.org. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.